Hello, this is Brendan Lyons. I'm a managing editor of the Times-Union, and welcome to another edition of the Capitol Confidential podcast. Today we are joined by our Capitol Bureau reporters, Mandy Freeze and Chris Bragg, to discuss what Senate Democrats in New York have declared as an historic outcome in the 2020 election. They secured what is known as a veto-proof supermajority. We will also hear from the Senate Deputy Majority Leader Mike Gianaris, who will provide his perspective on the Democrats' unprecedented victories. New York State Senate Democrats declared what amounts to a historic victory for their party, unprecedented in the state of New York for any party to have this much of a majority in the New York Senate. And so, Mandy, you were there. What was the tenor? What was the tone like at the Capitol today with Andrea Stewart-Cousins and company?
Well, she stepped up to the podium and was like,
"It is, shall I say, super to see you all here today."
Certainly, there was a feeling of elation. The majority leader outlined how this has progressed when it comes to the Democrats achieving a majority and now a supermajority. In 2019, they had 39. Beginning of session 2020, it got to 40. And
I'm announcing that in 2021, we will begin our session with a historic supermajority.
You know, it was a overarching look at some of the things that they have done, which they feel is what really helped them achieve that supermajority. And of course, there was a little rebuking of the Republicans who had come out early on, anticipating to pick up additional seats, which it's looking likely that will not be the case.
Sure. And Chris, the Democrats not only defended some seats downstate, but they picked up some wins upstate, some key wins. And I believe in the Mannion race, they're also feeling pretty positive about that. Do you see this as a trend that could continue in 2 years? Do you think that they could even grow this leadership even more? Or do you think that there might be some pushback from voters in 2 years?
I think Donald Trump is a special phenomenon in some ways in terms of dooming the Republicans in New York. I know in other parts across the country, he was in some ways good for Republicans, but just the two elections we had in 2018 and 2020 were some of the worst that GOP legislative candidates have ever had in New York. You might chalk a lot of it up to Trump. On the other hand, Democrats haven't controlled redistricting in forever. If I couldn't even tell you the last time. They haven't had the majority in decades. So the fact that they're going to be able to do that in the next year and a half, redraw district lines in a fairer way that's not gerrymandered, that could really entrench some of these districts. Upstate has been an emphasis for Senate Democrats for a long time. So some of those gains have been coming over years, and we'll see if those stick in the future.
Sure. And Mandy, they have some new faces in the Senate too. And there's often a concern that with new faces bring more progressive ideas and an insistence that they're not going to be cast aside, to not have their priorities considered. Stewart-Cousins, though, is a master negotiator. She's somebody that, as a leader, it seems, has a very loyal following. Do you think she'll be able to deal with that?
She certainly expressed confidence today when it comes to that question. Obviously, she's going to be having Democrats from upstate New York who might not be as far to the left as some of the downstate Democrats who have socialist backing are.
People were wondering how we were going to manage with our majority and how we were going to manage with the new majorities from upstate and Long Island. And we do it the way we do it. We do it so that everybody, frankly, is at the table. I think the secret of our sauce is making sure that the voices are heard, and our conference will only be enhanced by the additional voices and regions that will be represented in it. So I'm very excited about it.
She welcomes all of these new faces to the caucus. She feels that it'll only improve the conference. And overall, she really expressed the working together, having everybody at the table to come up with a resolution that everybody is okay with. So I think she'll be able to navigate some of that, but it will be interesting to see whether there's enough pushback from those freshman legislators that perhaps that changes a little bit.
Sure. And Chris, the Republicans, a little bit of egg on their face. They boldly came out the day after the election and declared an early victory in many of these races, and that voters had spoken. But we also were dealing with a pandemic vote with significantly more levels of absentee ballots. And you were following this pretty closely. How did that unfold, and much to their chagrin?
I was speaking with a Senate Republican spokeswoman last week about this, and she said that basically when they had that press conference the day after the election, that they weren't aware of the scope of how many absentee ballots there were in all these districts, and that was just something that kind of blindsided them over the last couple of weeks. This is something that both the media and people all across the country have been dealing with this year because of the pandemic, with so many absentee ballots cast and so many Democrats coming back in races. So you could also, argue that the media in New York, as the Senate Democrats have noted a number of times, also wasn't that quick to pick up on what was going on. So I think it took everybody a little bit by surprise, but obviously really not good for the Senate Republicans or their future as a caucus, what ultimately resulted.
Indeed, even the Times-Union briefly had a story on November 4th indicating that Trump had won certain counties in the capital region. And we quickly dialed that back because knowing the scope of the absentees, that was going to change. And it did change. Trump lost Rensselaer and Saratoga counties. But notably, historically, absentee ballots don't change the outcome. They follow the trend of the ballot box. And Chris, this year was different. Why do you think that so many Democrats voted by absentee?
It was a real emphasis for the Democrats in terms of how they operated their campaigns. I think they encouraged people to get their ballots in and really bank them early. On the other hand, Trump, as we've discussed, really was critical of absentee voting or voting by mail, and that arguably could have driven down some of the Republican votes in that manner. So on both ends, you kind of had a surge and a repression, perhaps.
I would just chime in. The one thing I've been thinking about is how there are local races that often come down to absentee ballots. And obviously with local races, it's because there's far fewer votes. However, I anticipate we might be seeing this more, where absentee ballots really make the difference in some elections. And we're just seeing that on a larger scale this election cycle.
And Mandy, the supermajority in essence means that the Democrats have a veto-proof majority. If Cuomo vetoes their legislation, they, along with the Assembly, could get on board and override that veto. But everyone seems to say they won't use it, they won't do that, but they will use it as leverage in their negotiations. And it will give them more leverage, especially on issues such as taxing billionaires, some of the more progressive issues. What do you think will change in terms of the dynamic now in the budget negotiations where Cuomo often dictates the playbook?
I think just being able to say they have a supermajority and therefore could potentially override any veto that the governor issues will give the governor a little bit of pause, and perhaps that will provide at least a little bit more leverage. Obviously, legislators don't really have much say when it comes to the state budget, as they've been bemoaning for years now. And having that veto-proof supermajority might be what is necessary to kind of give them the leverage they need to be able to get some of the priorities that they have into the budget. But again, it's something that remains to be seen. But both the Assembly and Senate leaders have expressed an interest and recognition that there are going to need to be revenue raisers in next year's budget.
And Chris, there is a young faction, a new faction of state senators, even before this year. Clearly, Senator Biaggi and some of the very vocal, very outspoken Senate Democrats who also, I would note, have no issues with criticizing or standing up to Cuomo in a public fashion. Do you think that might now be emboldened, and that there could be at times that Stewart Cousins may have to deal with brush fires when her younger and more progressive Senate colleagues might want to push the envelope a little bit with the governor?
The first 2 years they were in the majority, they passed all those progressive bills, especially the first year, the bail reform, although that was rolled back to a degree, but rent regulations, all those different things. And they ended up winning seats instead of losing them, including on Long Island, where people thought that would probably hurt them. So given that there was, in fact, not only not a consequence, but they picked up seats, you can't think that they would, not be emboldened by that and probably try to push the envelope further, like, as you mentioned, on, a millionaire's tax or something like that would seem like something that the Working Families Party would push for, that a lot of them are, closely associated with.
And clearly this was also a rebuke in many ways of the power of the police unions, who a lot of Republican lawmakers had enveloped themselves and said, the police unions are behind bail reform, is endangering people. That strategy didn't seem to work this time. It seems that, as Gianaris said, the Deputy Senate Majority Leader has said that it was an indication of where the voters may stand on some of those controversial issues.
Right after the election, Jay Jacobs, the chairman of the Democratic Party, who's very close to Cuomo, came out and said that the defund the police, in particular from AOC and others, had really hurt Democrats. And then, it ended up that the Democrats won more seats. So, they're still trying to make that argument, but not really amending that to reflect the new conditions on the ground. I don't think are Jay Jacobs or Cuomo or anybody in that camp.
Well, Chris and Mandy, thanks very much for being here on Capitol Confidential Podcasts. We are going to take a short break, and we'll be right back.
If you're enjoying this podcast, take advantage of all the Times Union has to offer and support our efforts to bring in you award-winning journalism by becoming a Times Union member today. Go to timesunion.com/subscribe.
And we're back. I'm Brendan Lyons, and you're listening to the Capitol Confidential Podcast. Mike Gianaris, the state Senate's Deputy Majority Leader, was also at the Capitol Monday when Democrats declared their supermajority in the chamber. We caught up with him on his way back to Queens to hear his take.
So, Senator, today at the state capitol in Albany was clearly a historic moment. And talk a little bit about what the Democratic victories in New York State this year in the Senate, can you put it in a little historical perspective for people in terms of how significant this was?
Sure. It's absolutely unprecedented. There has never been a Democratic supermajority in the Senate, and there has never been a majority this large for either party in the 321-year history of the New York State Senate. So it's a moment that is without precedent and gives us a very clear mandate to continue moving forward in the direction we charted the last 2 years.
In many ways, do you view this outcome as a rebuke of some of the more controversial issues that were unfolding out there? Law enforcement unions and the Republican senators had felt that, bail reform, some of the other pretrial changes in the criminal justice reforms were going to backfire on the Democrats, but that's apparently not what happened.
Apparently not. The Republicans were quick to jump out and proclaim victory about 3 weeks too early, as it turns out, based on impartial results. Very true to their leader, Donald Trump, who did the same thing. And when the results were in, it's pretty clear that all their fear-mongering, all their hateful lies that they told to the tune of millions of dollars in false ads against our candidates went absolutely nowhere. And so they took their best shot to try and tarnish us, and they failed miserably because voters are looking for hope. They're not looking for fear. And all they had was no message of their own, no platform of their own, just to try and scare people with lies about things that we've done that actually bring more justice to our state.
And in addition to that, you saw some victories upstate, which is normally a Republican frontier. I know that some key races in downstate were defended, but talk a little bit about this was not just a downstate secures the majority for you, but in fact this was almost across the state that you saw significant wins.
Well, it has to be. There's not enough districts in one part of the state to get a supermajority. So
sure.
We won all across the state. We defended seats on Long Island. We held seats in New York City. We won seats in the Hudson Valley, both defended and gained. And the biggest gains in terms of flipping Republican-held seats were in the upstate cities. Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse are really coming through for us and creating an incredibly rich and diverse conference that will allow us to better represent the entire state.
Sure. And Senator, the veto-proof majority now, that is significant not just because it's a tool that could be used. In fact, it may not be used, right? It's more as talk softly, carry a big stick. Is that sort of, it gives you a little bit of leverage, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, look, on many issues, all the relevant parties are in agreement now. The governor, the assembly speaker, and our leader are all Democrats. And so we have a commanding mandate from the public to move forward on certain issues. So they tend to be at least in the same direction. Sometimes we disagree over how far to go on a particular issue. But having this ability, even if we don't use it, will affect the outcomes because all the parties who are negotiating know what is possible. They know the math, and that'll affect someone's posture coming to the table. And so we're not looking to override vetoes just for the fun of it, but it's nice to know that should there be an area of disagreement, we do have that option available to us.
Mm-hmm. And your leader, Andrea Stewart-Cousins, she is starting to etch a legacy as a very skilled and measured and pragmatic leader. You know, even the people across the aisle seem to have great respect for her. Will that, do you think, enable her also to not rein in, but I guess moderate and work with the younger faction that's coming in, you know, not just this year, but in prior years, of younger, more progressive, outspoken Democrats who are also quick, as you sometimes are, to criticize the governor when needed. But do you think that that's something that her skill set will help her navigate?
Sure. Well, she's already done it. So we know what the track record is there. We've had an unprecedentedly large majority coming into this year. Now we've even grown it. But we had progressives like myself. We had younger people, older people. We've got a very different group of people. And she has brought the maturity in class and authority over our conference that holds everyone in line and keeps us unified. And that's how we were able to get so much done over the last 2 years. And now with even more members, I expect to do even more.
One last thing, I don't want to twist the knife, or allow you to twist the knife, but your Republican colleagues came out clearly too early on this. But looking back at it in terms of this outcome, you know, what do you think that the Republican conference should take away from this, should learn from this?
Humility for starters, and an appreciation that the voters are not going to be on your side if you're not presenting anything other than negativity. They literally had no message about what they represent or what they would do for this state, other than one particular issue that they were trying to scare people with, and it went down in flames. So not just the Republican Senate, by the way. A right-wing billionaire decided to throw in the PBAs throughout the state, put 7 figures into efforts to defeat some of our candidates, and they failed. And they failed by historic proportions. So hopefully they learn some humility given their record. I'm not terribly optimistic they will, but that'll just mean continued success for us and failure for them.
All right, Senator. Thanks very much for taking a few minutes. I appreciate it. I'll look forward to seeing you soon at the Capitol.
Thank you, Brendan.
Again, this is Brendan Lyons, and thank you for joining us for another edition of the Capitol Confidential podcast. Please remember to support journalism by considering a subscription, online or otherwise, to the Times-Union.